Welcome to Isn't It Obvious, where things are obvious. That's going to be the intro.
Welcome to Isn't It Obvious? Today's topic. Isn't it obvious that the prevalence of true crime and murder podcasts is very concerning to where we are as a state of a society?
Maybe?
Are you talking about things like Serial or things that talk about the justice system as well with murder, or just
More specifically, just the infatuation of murderers and crimes being committed. Not so much Serial is more of a reflection of the criminal justice system.
Right.
Though...
You're talking about the ones that are like, they go on about...
Yeah, there's a variety of podcasts that deal with the
small
story
town murder.
of...
I like Small Town Murder.
So do I.
It's great. But
it's fantastic, but it's like...
It does make me sick on some episodes. I'm
It's
like,
real concerning.
How
Like,
popular that is?
No. How accessible these clearly violent, abhorrent crimes are to listen to, and how dissecting them is a reflection of our society's real obsession with violence, because we're not a violent society.
We aren't. Beg to differ. We are a violent... Everything we do is... If it involves conflict, it's a war.
As a country or as a society?
Both, if we're talking as...
I mean,
country,
day-to-day lives.
United States society, our culture. We are a culture of war and conflict. Freaking war on Christmas, war on drugs, war on everything. It's always war. It's a big dick swinging contest between whatever one side or the other.
I agree with two of those, because war on Christmas isn't actually a thing.
Exactly.
And that is just a talking point.
Well, and
your verbiage statement,
that's what I mean.
Very valid.
We make everything into a fight. It's us versus them. It's Republicans versus liberals. Like it's
So you're saying Republicans are at war with liberals?
In a way, yeah.
But the battleground is really boring, like senatorial debates?
But it's still a conflict. It's still a fight.
But having things phrased in conflict...
seriously.
But having things phrased in the conflict is different than the obsession of specifically gratuitous murders. But the obsession of the story of what drives... The fact that there's a television show of how to get away with murder.
Wait, there's a television show? Or
how to get away with murder.
Is it like television show? Actually instructions, like a how-to
I don't
guide?
know. It's on ABC. I don't get ABC. But
I also don't
assume.
watch TV, so I couldn't tell you.
I think one of the main cruxes at the end of the first season is she actually committed murder. The main character did, and she's like teaching this class of how to get away with murder as part of a law course or something. I don't know. Ooh. Yell at me in the comments. But it still goes back to... It's not a matter of conflict, because conflict has good and bad, but it's the obsession with...
The violence.
The minutia of what led up to a murder. It's not the good guys finding the bad guy. It's not someone coming to justice. It's the obsession of trying to understand what drove someone to murder.
Wait, I mean, this concept of, like, murder mysteries, it goes back a while, right? Like, the whole library
but murder mystery is someone is brought to justice. Going through the steps of leading up to murder and the gratuitous exploration of how that murder happened is what I find being a corruptible aspect to our culture.
Yeah.
Because good guys defeating bad guys is fine, and that story can be found wherever. War has that story, criminals coming to justice have that story,
right.
And these true crimes kind of have that, but that's not the crux of it.
Right.
The crux of it is this guy married this girl, he beat her, and then one day she disappeared. 5 years later, he ended up beating someone else and said, I'm gonna kill you like I killed her. And then that's what's interesting, is that this dude, who's clearly absolutely abusive, actually lived and abused many people, and murdered one of them. But we find that interesting.
Right, this is some sort of, like, strange novelty for the audience to be like, well, I just can't stop listening, or, like, this is a train wreck that I just have to watch. I don't know, it's just strange because I myself don't have any, like, incentive nor care or motivation to listen to these things because they're so dark. Okay. In a way, it's, if it was just played in the background, I would listen to it. Like, I probably wouldn't stop it.
So, I kind of disagree. I don't think we need to make it some grand thing. And I don't think there needs to be as much showmanship or whatever involved in it, but I do think there is something very human about wanting to understand that mindset of a killer. You know, there is something you want to, like, as a person, as a human being, how could someone...
But is that reflection of where we currently are in society, where that type of action is so admonished and besmirched and ostracized, where 1,000 years ago you could go be a highwayman and murder a whole bunch of people and that is your life, and there was kind of less consequences for it.
Unless you bit off more than you can chew.
Yeah, or you're Vlad the Impaler and you are sticking people on tree poles.
Yeah, but you also had
30,000 people at a time.
You also had a bunch of people like who were bad.
True, yeah, that leaders. So it's more of the individual doing that.
I think it's more of the crime shows are usually based on, like, let's be honest, serial killer, that abnormal, crazy sociopath or psychopath rather, who is trying to get their fix because they enjoy raping and murdering people. You can still find enjoyment in listening to a podcast about Vlad the Impaler. You can find enjoyment in listening to a podcast about other criminals, white crime, any of that.
Because Bernie Madoff is as interesting as Vlad the Impaler.
No, I was going to say that it seems we can bucket them into two groups. Vikings and pillagers attack villages off the seacoast and loot them. It's business. It's kind of, it's very personal because of the people getting killed and slain and, unfortunately robbed of all their belongings. But, like the highwayman example, right? Mm. But it seems like, this is just business. This is a concept of a profession doing terrible things, but it's understood versus a small town murderer that is just doing this for what motivation exactly? Like, what's their incentive?
What is the romanticism around Jack the Ripper? Why is that story brought up so much in our society now? Serial killer who murdered 4 women over 100 years ago, but yet that still has so much power in our cultural identity as Western culture.
People are fascinated by the people who don't make sense, the people that are anomalies, the people who act out in ways that they can't predict.
Yeah, there is certainly that impact, too. It's Jack the Ripper, a doctor who invented a new way.
Not Robert Stevenson, who murdered 18 women in Alabama in 1973. Don't Google that.
No, it's not. I was thinking more like accidental deaths or deaths of incompetence, malpractice type of deaths. Like, we don't care about those as much as we care about a guy that is just,
But then you have Jack Kevorkian is not known to anyone under the age of 25.
Yeah, it's a culture test for sure.
But Jack the Ripper probably is.
Right. I agree. I just have the Unabomber, right? Like the concept of a spectacular...
So, like the malcontent has more impactful?
Yeah, there has to be some level of shock for sure. Right? No one really bats an eye that 50,000 deaths occur on the U.S. interstate. This is a small type of town that just disappears every year. But it's okay. I mean, this is just a thing that we live with. But yeah, certainly a person of a small town murderer who kills 4 people, it's such an outlier. Why would someone do that? What's their motivation? What's their incentive? How come they would decide to do something so reckless and needless? Like, we don't live in an environment where you need to be a highwayman just to have that risk reward, just to have bread. Like, there's no need for this. There's no, I would say, understanding or rationale that would make sense other than that there's just people out there that may look normal and interact with people normally, but are
totally nuts.
And I think that triggers a part of the brain that's like, you need to, as a survival reason almost, like maybe subconsciously, but like you need to understand that there's people out there that are just nuts, and that your current model of thinking that people are reasonably similar to you in, maybe in thoughts or in maybe intellect or problem solving is out the window. If you take 1 million people by the math, 1 person out of that million is going to be perhaps the smartest of them all, right? And the same concept is like, that there's going to be outliers of many different dimensions, maybe unethical or capable of murder or just not functioning in a society in a good way, but you can mask it, some hidden disease until it strikes. These are like very scary things. These are things that keep me up at night when I'm trying to teach the next generation of people, hey, generally speaking, most people are going to be kind of decent, right? Or most people are kind of like you, they have feelings, they care, don't be a jerk. But there's going to be people out there that wouldn't mind killing you at all whatsoever, right? Like, that's a strange thought. It's strange to me even thinking about that. I can go about my day, go to the mall where there's a lot of people, a baseball game where there's tens of thousands of people there, and like, oh, well, maybe not that many people. Airport,
one of them there, though.
One of them there is probably crazy. And crazy not in a way that, like, I'm okay with. Not like...
crazy, but... crazy.
No, crazy stealth
like,
crazy.
Terrifying crazy.
Terrifying, like I'm going to put all these people,
You're the last person I'd want to meet in a dark alley. Or even just in a parking lot. I would never want to have a conversation with that kind of person, ever.
But the type of person that's like smiles and wears a nice suit and a tie type of thing that just looks like a normal person and does all these terrible things, that's way more terrifying to me than a highwayman. Right? A highwayman I can understand because, they're hungry. Vikings and...
Or they just enjoy living that kind of life, but...
Right.
Is there then
There's
a
rationale, though.
A rationale I can make.
There's a logic to it.
Right.
So is there then a benefit to the mass production and mass dissemination of these types of media outlets that are investigating it? In terms of that's beneficial if a young listener had similar thoughts to this person that they would seek help. Is that a benefit of these?
Oh, boy.
Well, I don't know about that because I was listening to one of those podcasts, right, about this killer was caught. He grew up in sort of a religious, repressed, whatever. But he heard about other serial killers, and he's like, oh, they're like me. Mm-hmm. You know, like it wasn't, I'm going to go get help now. It's, there's other people out there who have the same creepy...
That's the detrimental flip of it. Where for the people who...
I'm not totally...
Animal abuse is a hallmark of many serial killers, where they do this thing, and they get some reflection. If they hear about these other serial killers, are they going to be...
Oh, I'm not alone.
Are they going to be, I'm not alone, and I can keep doing these things, and I should be better than them? Or is it...
Or I'll learn from them?
I need to find help now, because what I'm doing now is bad.
Well, it's not that, because most of those, unfortunately, are narcissists, and they don't find fault in themselves. So everything is someone else's problem. Okay, so serial killers are often narcissists. They don't think about what they've done as wrong. You know, they torture a cat, they torture a dog. You know, they don't see it as wrong. They they'll see the reactions of their fellow kid or whatever, and the child or whatever will throw up, or, you know, the normal kid will throw up or cry or be like, holy shit, man, that's disgusting, stop it. Whereas the serial killer would be like, I don't know what do you care what I'm doing? But they'll also recognize, okay, this isn't something I do in front of other people, and so that encourages them to hide it. And then they read about or listen about other serial killers, and they're like, so they did this. Okay, I'm going to use that. Mm-hmm. That seems like a great idea. Oh, this is how that other person got caught. I'm not going to do that. That seems like a terrible idea.
Figuring how like Ted Bundy or Ed Gein were caught.
And that's why there's copycats.
Yeah, so is that a benefit or a detriment to society since we have all of these deep dives into these horrific crimes?
I think it's a benefit.
How
so?
So?
On the plus side.
The plus side is that it really shakes me to my core that not everyone is not just polite, but usually people have this mistaken idea that built are like that. Mm. What else? What other baseline could you possibly use? So you have this idea that perhaps their morality is a little different or their values are different, but that's just their upbringing. That's just maybe the way that they're raised. That's just maybe the culture they come from. But generally speaking, if you would have plucked them somewhere else, they would be very similar to me. Or they grew up similar to my standards, they would have maybe the same rationale, more or less. But these type of shows really shatter that myth. Mm-hmm. You know, it's not like don't trust anybody. That's a very strange message. But it's more like, well, beware. And I think that the serial killers that are out there now that are capable of such murders, like they're able to do that because the information wasn't there. One of the tips and tricks is the murderer would look at their watch when they're trying to pick somebody up, and then the victim would be kind of caught off guard to be like, oh well, yeah, I guess he's busy. You know, in their head they're thinking, oh well, yeah, I mean, you know, he probably has to go to somewhere later today, and so this is probably safe. Like these are just small little mannerisms that these serial killers would just know. They're essentially sending out a signal that's false, and that people will catch on, and then people have this idea that, well, yeah, people are same and similar to me, and so they're not going to be these type of murderers. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking that the serial killers that are looking at the media that says, oh, that maybe kind of glorifying them in a way, certainly making them entertaining,
right,
would be like, oh, I'm going to learn from their mistakes. But if they're going to be like that, I wouldn't imagine that they're going to do some research anyway, right? Like,
well, one of the main things with Ed Gein was he was a bartender at a cop bar and heard all of the after-hours conversations between all these cops, and he used that in his crimes,
right?
Where he would find out where there weren't a lot of police
presence,
or
where the police were chasing perhaps a red herring,
right, or
how to confuse a scene, or
that type of thing, and like what they would look for, and that was part of his thing because he turned himself in twice for murders. That's really funny in a horrible way. But with me saying that is an entertainment value I gained out of listening to this man who committed horrific murders.
Well, here's another positive. Normal human being who's listening to these shows or reading these stories, you start to pick up on things that might set off little alarm bells in your head. I don't know about you two, but as a woman, I'm not gonna just walk in the middle of the night to my car from like a bar or something on my own. Like, I just wouldn't do that. Like, I should be able to, right? Like, in theory, I should be able to. I should be safe.
You having to preface all of this is a way different indictment on our society.
Yeah, but like,
than
it's
what
just,
we're talking about now.
You learn to not put yourself at risk. You try to make it so you're as safe as you possibly can be. And that's never going to be enough, of course, if you're targeted. But there are things you can do, like, try not to be alone. Try to be in a group. Try to be, hopefully you're, if you're working at a restaurant or a coffee place or something, you're on staff with more than one person. Like, you aren't just, manning that alone. Because that would be, easy. Like, someone could just come and take you. There's things by listening to these you can see, like, okay, well, that's this guy's MO. That's this person's. This is how they do it. Like, they get hitchhikers. Or they get.
So a benefit of these is finding, however random it might seem, some type of MO to watch out for with someone who could be an offender.
Yeah, just it's little steps you can take to make yourself a little.
Someone
safer.
who's sitting in a dark alley looking at their watch a whole bunch. Or,
avoid them.
Yeah.
Israel Keys, he would pick up people and, like, if they were, like, alone and it was just, and they were far enough away from the entrance, like, he would just grab them. A parking lot. Well, whatever.
Mm-hmm. Right, but then
interesting things, but, like, you just, don't be in a parking lot that far away from, like, try not to be.
But it's also, like, Ed Gein happened in the 70s. Mm-hmm. Ted Bundy happened in the 70s. It was when national media was able to cover these serial killers. That's why they're so well known. Yeah. But it was before society had the proper countermeasures and education that these people exist.
One of the things that I think about when it comes to, like, serial killers and murders in general is, I hate to say it, but in the UK they have a lot of, like, closed circuit televisions, right? Mm-hmm. And the populace, I mean, this is back in 2003 when they, like, pulled them, like a BBC thing. They said they were kind of against it. Their average Joe, it's like, I hate all these cameras everywhere. It's incredibly invasive. And then they would say something like, oh, well, we caught the person who grabbed somebody, right? And then suddenly the public perception of having these type of surveillance systems like skyrocket. And the reason why I bring that up is because, like, serial killers, like, when I listen to them, you get kind of, like, fearful, right? Like, you get the concept of, like, well, now I have fear sparked in me. What can I do to reduce risk? And if some politician said, oh, I have an idea for you, and they're kind of like, oh, what's your idea? National register for DNA. Or there's always going to be a drone in the sky that can track people. Because it's public anyway, right? We're just saving money.
But, I mean...
And that's another topic for another time.
Right.
There's a difference between CCTV and, like, a DNA registry.
But
everyone gives their fingerprints at, like, 18.
One of the things that kind of, like, maybe the side effect for me anyway, when I hear these stories, I'm like, oh, technology can solve this problem for us.
It can help. Not solve. It can help.
And then it's like, oh wait, it could make it way worse.
Right. But one thing,
like the cure is worse than the...
Yeah. It was prior to 2003 or whenever you happen to hear that. It was when I was in college. So late aughts, early teens, where they had a study where it was like, yeah, I'm not a terribly big fan in London of, like, these CCTVs at work, but then I have the thought that I'm going to walk into a place, it'll record me walking into a place, and then I'll walk out of a place, it'll record me walking out of a place. I don't have anything to hide, and now it's there to corroborate my story.
Right.
So it's kind of the same thing where, like, being on video only hurts the guilty. If you're innocent, you're fine. But in that same sense, it's like, I don't want anyone to know that I'm walking into the Brony store on 4th Street, but cameras are going to see me doing that.
I was going to mention that
private.
When you said
I need that damn
Pinkie Pie classic edition of,
How dare you say an actual thing?
The idea for me is when you said something like, well, listening to these podcasts, does that actually encourage serial killers or does it make them realize that they need help? And I can assure you that if you have a group of people that are like, hey, you like that obscure thing too that you shouldn't like because you're a grown man and this is meant for, like, little girls to watch.
Hey.
You should be like...
I mean, no, that's different.
No, but the idea is like, oh, good, I feel good. I feel like I have a group now, right? Like, that's kind of where... I'm thinking that it's not not that is not a thing where it's risk mitigation. It's like, oh, they need help. No, it's like, oh, I feel encouraged. I think that's actually a huge negative about these romantic sort of podcasts that talk about these things. And if you happen to be someone who's predispositioned to murder people, that wouldn't help.
Here's the thing. If I were to look through someone's podcast or film or any type of like what they're digesting as media, and a lot of it is adolescent cartoons as opposed to like nothing but crime shows, one of those I would be far more concerned about.
I disagree. Like, they're both awful. Don't do that. Especially if it's both.
Mix it up with some adult comedies.
Yeah.
Oh, I
or
see.
something.
No,
No.
these are like classic indicators. Like, if one of the things that I find kind of humorous is like if I had a child that was taking great joy in the misery of animals, you know, that's like
Classic sign.
That's
maybe
a classic sign
I
of
should
something
get this
is going
kid
wrong.
To
Right.
see a psychologist.
So maybe that's
immediately.
a positive side too. But to be honest, though, I feel like mental health type of research just isn't really there. What can you really do?
But if it's not specifically like violent abuse, where to the point of evisceration or tangible harm to an animal, extra whap on the nose or like some exertion of power is a different type of psychological.
Yeah, well,
outlet.
there is a difference between a sociopath and a psychopath.
Right.
And
Yeah,
there's
absolutely.
A difference between
Or just an average person acting.
antisocial behavioral things and someone
there
who's
are
gonna
levels to watch out
murder
for,
you.
and it's tough if you are ingesting, like, I'm a father of 3 kids, ingesting all of these murder podcast, TV shows, media, and I see my son hit the dog because the dog was like trying to get his food, but like keep hitting the dog. First thought isn't really going to be murderer, but there'll be extra care taken there to make sure that
you
that's
kind
the thing.
of
But
explain to him why that's not a good thing.
But I don't think that changes if you don't listen to these podcasts.
No.
If I listen to nothing but My Little Pony podcast and I see that, I'm probably going to have the same concern. Because that's not how someone should treat an animal.
Right, but the idea of the type of murder podcast is that you're picking up some sort of pattern of these people that do these heinous crimes, right? Abuse to animals, abuse to their partners, just lack of care or empathy or sympathy. And it's not just like the one event, but it frames a whole view of what other symptoms should it be picking up.
And maybe that'll encourage the guardian or whoever's supposed to be taking care of this kid who's clearly showing these signs. That should say something to that like the guardian should be like, okay, maybe I should get this kid some help, or the teacher, or whatever.
On the flip side, though, I kind of wonder, and I'm not obviously a psychologist, but I kind of wonder about that brain. Like, could you ever really change that? Can you really divert it to a positive way?
I mean, you could Dexter, but change it to where it's focused to some good for the sake of a.
I don't think that's a good
dramedy.
I don't think that's a good example. But you could if you had them kind of under watch, basically, and you were able to reason with this, because some sociopaths can be, functional.
Ted Bundy
They're
was
still
not suspected by anyone.
Yeah, but they're still the relationships generally fail because they're narcissists and they don't always hold a job, because eventually people figure out that they're just talking out of their ass and they're not actually making a positive impact on the company. So they are going to be destined to fail ultimately. But if you can get to them early enough and reason with them and kind of not necessarily show them the better path, but show them why and explain to them why using logic, it could possibly work. It's just the problem is you're dealing with, sometimes it's sexual in nature. Mm-hmm. That's where I don't know. I don't think you can really divert that.
Okay. Well, this obvious topic has definitely opened more avenues for further investigation.
Right.
And as we wrap it up, I just have to say, I'm sorry, Mom.
Yeah, we're all really sorry, Mom.